Focus over diversification. Look at the billionaires in the world. They didn't get there through diversification. They got there because they were extraordinarily good at one thing. And then maybe when that really paid off and was really powerful, then they chose to start investing in other things. And if it's Carlos Slim's from, South America, basically it's all telecommunications being wrapped in there and all complementary to the business. So he's not out there investing in something he knows nothing about. So if you don't know anything about something and you invest in it, risk is in the investor, not the investment. How do you relate to that investment? If it's an investment you don't know or understand, you're taking on too much risk. Financial freedom isn't really kind of what financial people sell it as. It's not having a certain amount of money in a bank account. Because financial freedom is a state of mind. It's a state of being. It's when money is no longer your primary reason or excuse why you do or don't do something. So it's no longer your primary reason. It's still something you take into consideration. But most of the world is stuck in this mindset where they're always worried about money. It's their primary focus. And if they don't feel like they have enough, they fall into scarcity. And so we begin there. There's really two determinant paradigms that really are responsible for all outcomes in the world. One is the scarcity mindset. It's a place of fear, doubt, worry. It's a thought process of the consumer condition. And the consumer condition states they look to take more money from the world than they give to it. They look to take more value from the world than they give to it. It's where entitlement exists. I'm sure you've seen this. You've been around people that are in scarcity. How exciting is it to be around someone in scarcity? Usually the conversations consist of complaining, of blame, of the latest political issues and the latest problems, but there's never a talk about the solution. There's never a talk about responsibility. And so scarcity, that no matter how much luck, saving, discipline, rate of return, or no matter how great your financial advisor is, scarcity is the greatest destroyer of wealth. And none of that matters if you're stuck in it. So it takes a shift into this mindset of abundance. Abundance doesn't mean that we go frolic in fields holding hands in a Zen-like state and that everything's always perfect. It just means that ingenuity, innovation, it means that resourcefulness is key. And that even if there's only a finite amount of something in the world, like there's supposed to be a finite amount of money, but while I'm talking, they're printing it right now, right? And do they have to print it anymore, or does it just show up on a computer screen as some dots at this point, right? Even if there's a finite amount of something, there's still all these different ways that we can come up with new ideas, new systems, new technologies, new ways of bringing something out there. So even if there's only a certain amount of oil, there's a different form of energy than just oil out there. Thomas Malthus, anyone ever heard of this guy, Thomas Malthus? He said hundreds of years ago that we were going to run out of food. Now, we haven't run out of food. Now, what would qualify as food, maybe, in some cases. And by the way, I'll just point this out. The best way for this to go extraordinarily well is laugh at my horrible jokes. That really does help out. I always tell my wife that I want to be a comedian, and she always reminds me of just one incident in Costa Rica where a band finished playing in front of a room of a couple hundred people, and there was a mic up there, so I figured that was my chance to do some stand-up comedy. And she left the room promptly, and then when she came back and people were laughing, she's like, they're not laughing at the jokes, they're laughing at you being a joke. And so, very painful as I bring this to you. But I tell her that when I do events, people laugh. She's like, you're making them money. Of course they're going to laugh. It's a courtesy. It's they want to do really well, so they're just going to appease you that way. But I don't care. It still feels the same, Feel free to laugh at all of this. Be abundant with your laughter, really. So abundance is this producer paradigm. And the producer paradigm is where people seek to contribute more to the world than they take from it. It's a mindset. It's a way of life. It's a way of being. So even if you didn't have the right amount of money to do something in the moment, rather than in scarcity where people would just say very defeatingly, I can't afford it, people in abundance would say, what would it take to afford that? How could I afford that? What type of value could I create? How could I be more resourceful even if I don't have all the resources at my helm right now? Because there isn't just one type of capital. Financial capital is a lot like a receipt. It's like going to the grocery store, you get a receipt at the end and they don't even give them to you all the time anymore because I don't want pieces of paper floating around, right? So the receipt is just evidence of something. What's it evidence of? Of the meat, the potatoes, the vegetables. Yet most people wake up confused, only thinking about how to get more money, which is just one form of capital. But what I'm committed to over the next couple of days is to help you with two other precious forms of capital. The first one being mental capital. Have you ever heard the sentiment or saying, it's not what you know, it's who you know? That's not really true, because if you know nothing, no one wants to hang out with you. No one's going, oh yeah, I can't wait to hang out with something that brings nothing to the table, right? What you know is critically important in today's world. As a matter of fact, with the internet and everything that we have, it doesn't even really matter about brawn anymore, it's about brains. It doesn't really matter about force and coercion, it's really about value creation. So if you have mental capital that can really solve some of the complex issues out there in the world, you can get paid extraordinarily well for that. But if you have a lot of knowledge and you never do anything with it, it's latent potential. So what we have to translate mental capital into is, how do we take that and serve others, because that's called relationship capital. Relationship capital is people, networks, organizations, family, friends. And look, relationship capital can be positive or negative, right? You might have some negative relationship capital in your life. People that are naysayers, people that don't want to see you do well, people that constantly complain and they're stuck in the scarcity mindset. I have a pretty simple equation for that, by the way. I just call it friends versus friendly. Friends are people that I invite to things. I say yes to their invitations. And people I'm friendly with, I always say no to their invitations in a polite way. And I never invite them to anything. And that's pretty simple, right? Try it on. Next time someone invites you to something, you don't want to hang out with them, they're not a good person for you to be around, just say, hey, I appreciate that. That's not going to happen. But you can say it nicer than that, That'd be kind of funny, though, if you just said, no, that's unlikely. Just see how it goes. And then I once gave someone advice, and when he got in an argument with his wife using my advice, he immediately said, that's what Garrett said to do, and blamed it on me. He wasn't really following my advice really well, but I got the blame for it. So friends versus friendly is one of the important things in relationship capital, because I know you've heard who you spend your time with makes a big difference, but I'm also going to say who you don't spend your time with makes the biggest difference. You can have 10 extraordinary relationships that are game changers in this world, and one absolutely negative relationship can wipe all of that out. So the equation that we're looking at is, take your mental capital, multiply it by your relationship capital, and that will determine your financial capital. So if you think you have a money problem, it's never a money problem. It's an idea problem or a people problem. That's what it is. Money was just the scorecard, it was just the benchmark, it was just a symptom that you either don't have the right information. So let's give an example. There's a lot of people that will ask me what a good investment is, or should they invest in something. First of all, if you have to ask me that, you're probably not ready to invest in that just yet. If you have to ask, is this a good investment? Because the real answer is, a good investment for whom? It depends. I believe in investor DNA, and your investor DNA, it's one of the segments we're going to go through to help you uncover and decode it, because when you figure out your investor DNA, the first thing you're going to get back is time. You're not going to waste your time on anything that isn't aligned with your investor DNA. You're not going to listen to pitches and investments that aren't right for you, and you're only going to focus, instead of diversify, on a narrow group of things that is going to produce more return for you. Andrew Carnegie said he put all of his eggs in one basket and watched it like a hawk. Focus over diversification. Look at the billionaires in the world. They didn't get there through diversification. They got there because they were extraordinarily good at one thing, and then maybe when that really paid off and was really powerful, then they chose to start investing in other things. And if it's Carlos Slims from South America, basically it's all telecommunications being wrapped in there and all complementary to the business. So he's not out there investing in something he knows nothing about. So if you don't know anything about something and you invest in it, risk is in the investor, not the investment. How do you relate to that investment? If it's an investment you don't know or understand, you're taking on too much risk. Does that make sense? So if you really take that into consideration before you invest, that's critically important. And not just having the right information, but also having the right people and team. I wrote a book recently called What Would the Rockefellers Do? And one of the things the Rockefellers invented was a Rockefeller-style family office. What they did that the Vanderbilts didn't do, because the Vanderbilts had more money than the U.S. Treasury at one time. Cornelius was a badass. Really, more money than the U.S. Treasury, that's pretty impressive. Unfortunately, 54 years after Cornelius died, the first Vanderbilt died broke. And Anderson Cooper is an heir of the Vanderbilts, but he didn't get any money. because of bad decision making, not having a financial team, and they started to just buy things. Like they owned 10 mansions at one time that some have been torn down, and one's a museum in Rhode Island. It didn't have anything to do with their investor DNA. It had nothing to do with how they made their money, and most importantly, the values, the contribution, and the philosophy hadn't translated to the next generation. Which I don't know about you, but one of the things that I constantly ask myself is, how do I make sure to pass on wealth to my kids so they don't become trust fund kids, or that they don't feel entitled, but instead, it's a blessing instead of a curse? Well, the Rockefellers figured that out in a pretty big way because they're the 6th generation of passing money on. They donated $50 million to charity last year, and their net worth is still growing. Part of that was relationship capital. They built a financial team that worked just for their family, right? So everyone sat around and they said, we need attorneys, accountants, we need insurance professionals, we need, asset protection people, we need fiduciaries and investment people, and they sat around and worked on the Rockefeller estate to make sure it's preserved, protected, and perpetuated. Some good alliteration right there, right? I've said it before, it wasn't that impressive. I had it in my head already. But this is a big deal. Because if you look at, if you're a business owner, we all know how important it is to hire good people. We know how essential a good team is. Yet if you look at your financial life, have you taken the same amount of care and concern to build a good financial team? Have you thought about whether or not they're A players? If they're out looking for you and looking after you to make sure that you're protecting your wealth and that everything's integrated and coordinated. When I was 22 years old, I went into a family office in New York. I was shadowing this financial guy, and they had told me he's like the best guy in the world at the time. And so it took me about 3 years because I started in the financial business when I was 19, basically peddling products to family and friends, nothing all that impressive. When they tell you an internship, what they don't tell you is your internship is to bring your people to us so they can buy stuff from us. So bring family and friends. And I did that, but I wanted to get better at it, so at really making an impact and doing something different than just selling mutual funds and life insurance. And so I started to study the best that I could find. And for 2 straight years, I went somewhere once a month. And one of these times, I went and I shadowed Vince. I paid him, I said, I'll just be a fly on the wall. And he's a New Yorker. He's like, you're not allowed to talk at all. I'm like, great. I won't say anything. And we walked in a family office. And this one, he said, was low end because you only had to be worth $50 million to work with them. I was like, $50 million? I wonder if my whole town I'm from, East Carbon, where I first grew up, is worth $50 million if you add everybody up. I don't think so. I think it's a negative net worth there now. Coal mines, yeah. So anyway, I walk in, I sit down, I'm watching this, and he's presenting a strategy, and everyone around the table is doing real due diligence. Now, in the world of finance, due diligence is like Sasquatch. You hear about it all the time, but you never see it, right? It's almost impossible for a financial person to do due diligence if they're selling you a product because they have a bias, whether they're a good person or not, because that's how they get paid. So they're going to see kind of the best parts of that better than they're going to see what the downsides are. And when I saw that, I was like, this is pretty fascinating. And so he presented a strategy. They didn't implement it for 4 years, that strategy, because of all the moving pieces and parts and making sure it was going to work out. I was like, this is what I want to build. This is what I've got to create in my own life. And this is what other business owners deserve, that have high revenues, that are the working wealthy, but not necessarily high net worth.
Want to master your money? Want to figure out the things that you could do to improve your finances? Click here and check out more videos like this on Money Matters.